Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have our Northern Virginia football preview with local expert Jason Sterling. He joined me twice last year. Jason is a Stonebridge guy. I believe his kids went to Stonebridge. Jason helps out with the announcing, does some spotting for the announcing up at Stonebridge. I know also Jason is from Goochland County, played football down there, and knows a little bit about Richmond football as well, even though today's focus is going to be on Northern Virginia. Jason, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Julian, appreciate you having me on. It's great to see you.
Oh, of course. Thanks for that. So I wanted to talk about it was a frustrating summer in the local scene because we spent most of the summer with dialogue about Hayfield. Daryl Overton, who was a former coach at Freedom Woodbridge, who won the last state championships there, moved in, and there's a lot of players that followed him into the district. Some players transferred from other schools. And so there's been a battle all summer to see whether the transfers were rightly done. That seems to be behind us, but what's not behind us is who is going to be eligible to play this season. Just want to get a sense, and I know Hayfield, they won the first game over a tough West Springfield team, at least by last year's standards, a tough West Springfield team. Not sure if you caught that, but do we know who's going to be on Hayfield's roster and whether or not it's going to be a final roster eventually?
Yeah, unfortunately, even 2 weeks into the season now, Julian, I don't think the final eligibility requirements have been settled. A number of the guys have been cleared, which is good. There are still a few that are being looked at. So depending on how long that goes, that could obviously pose some problems for Hayfield. I certainly think on paper, as you look at them and maybe what we saw to that West Springfield game, they are easily the favorite to come out of Region 6C. In West Springfield, you're right, was potentially the second best team in the entire region there. And Hayfield handled them pretty easily. Their star running back, Jeff Overton, the coach's nephew, he is eligible to play. And I think when you've got a player like that, Julian, that is the reigning two-time Class 6 state player of the year, which means he won it as a sophomore his first time, as a junior last year, and obviously, his final year of playing here before he heads off to Virginia Tech to play his college football. I think when you've got a player like that, you can headline a team. So they're solid. They're really good. Obviously, there's a heck of a lot of noise. We don't usually have a lot of off-season high school football noise. There was a lot this summer, as you alluded to. I think everybody's anxious to see where the final roster will land, and then Coach Overton can work his magic from there and try and put these guys back into the state title hunt, which I fully expect he will, frankly, Julian. So,
oh yeah, well, Jason, I believe they have a transfer from St. John's that played quarterback, which is interesting. You don't get many private school to public transfers, and we have a few. I think Stonebridge may have one or two as well that we could talk about later. Last year, the last couple of years, Coach Overton got a lot of mileage out of Tristan Evans Trujillo, I believe, and who's a scrappy kid, not necessarily a huge college prospect, but just the kind of kid that gets it done. A quarterback like a Dave Craig, or I'm trying to think of a classic quarterback that's not the physical specimen you necessarily look for, but just a kid with a lot of courage and a lot of smartness, and really ran Coach's offense perfectly. This year, I can't think of the kid's name from St. John's. I should
Isaiah French.
Isaiah French, yes. He's a bona fide prospect. He's running the offense. So that's with him and also Overton. You got to have that's a pretty good building block for their offense.
It is, and he's much different than Evans was, obviously in stature. You're right about Evans. I mean, phenomenal high school football player, just a gritty kid, relatively small in stature. French is just the opposite. He's a pretty big kid. He's got a lively arm, and I think he's got all the makings of playing at the next level as well. So, and you're right. It wasn't just folks coming in from Freedom Woodbridge, but French is from St. John's. You mentioned a couple of other guys. They've got a guy, Vincent Ordinas. He's a wide receiver, came in from DeMatha. So Overton's got a number of talented players there, and that's not to mention just some of the other talented all-state players that he had. And I think Juju Preston, I believe, is still not playing right now. So he's one of those guys that they're waiting to sort of determine the eligibility on. He's the Clemson commit at wide receiver. They've got talent up and down the roster. Now, it's not a huge roster, but Julian, if you think about it, they were a playoff team last year. Hayfield was. Now, they lost in the first round. So, if any of those kids stayed on that program plus added what they got, they are absolutely a force to be reckoned with. And honestly, they're my favorite in Class 6 right now. Even if a few guys are not eligible to play this entire season to come out of that classification, I just think they are loaded from a starting lineup position. Maybe depth may be a concern, and that may be something that we want to keep our eye on as the competition stiffens up as they move throughout the season in the playoff. But Coach Overton, he knows what he's doing from a coaching standpoint. I've seen him coach a number of games live, and I don't think he gets enough credit for his play calling, his clock management, just how he gets the guys in the right positions. You think of, hey, he's building up talent and he's great at, getting guys in the weight room and just understanding his scheme. But you've also got to be able to put X's and O's out on a Friday night. And he is very adept at doing that. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that, frankly.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. I'm reminded the opening drive against Highland Springs in the state final, where Jeff Overton was the decoy, the first drive, and Tristan Evans, little guy going against big Highland Springs defense. I think ran the ball at least 2 or 3 times, and the first touchdown was scored by their other running back, who was a good running back as well. But Overton is a very shrewd tactician. He's more than just an inspirational guy. I think one of the challenges of being a high school football fan in the national district where Hayfield is it's not a historically strong football district anymore. Mount Vernon got destroyed by Westfield, and going into that game, we didn't know where Westfield stood because they had gotten destroyed by Patriot. Patriot might be a tough team. Edison, last year I think beat Hayfield. I think they had a winning record, but they're not always a great football program. I don't think they're going to be challenged very much in that conference. The games could be running clock I don't know if they have that by the second quarter, but they could be running clock pretty early this season.
Yeah, I agree with you, Julian. I think the national district itself in Region 6C, the other district is a lot better, top to bottom, the Patriot district, but the national district is probably is very top heavy with Hayfield, and then it does peel off a little bit from there with your Justices, the Falls Churches of the world, John Lewis. Now, not to say those teams don't have some talent and can put some plays together. I think historically they were all sort of at the same level, so you really didn't know who would come out of that pack from a district standpoint. I think now with Hayfield and the influx of talent that they've got, they certainly are going to be the team to beat, and on paper and likely on the field on Friday nights as well.
Yeah, I think looking at their schedule, only Riverside Baptist and South County probably will be reasonably tough games for them until we get to the playoffs, and then
Right.
So who knows? So do you have any? Is it easy to say who the clear second choice is in that conference?
Gosh, yeah, I was thinking about that. I figured you might ask that. I really don't know. My gut feeling is it's possibly Edison, maybe Falls Church, but I'm not really sure, Julian. I think you could take the other remaining 7 or 8 teams that are in that district and shake them up a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if any of the other teams became the sort of the second best team with the second best record. I really can't say. TJ out of Alexandria, possibly, maybe a Mount Vernon. It's really hard to say.
Yeah,
So,
the first round of games didn't give you a lot of confidence in the rest of the
right.
district. But let's hope a great storied high schools. They're all really old high schools that have been around for many years, and they've had their up years for sure. Let's go to the other 6C district, which is Patriot. Patriot is lots of great athletes in this conference in basketball and in football, and I'm sure other sports as well. West Springfield took a loss to Hayfield, but they had a great season last year. South County, coached by the great Jerry Pannoni. They're perennial tough teams. I know they had a tough loss to Quince Orchard. My alma mater, Robinson, had a really down year last year. Great football history. They had a nice win against, was it South Lakes, I believe.
Yes.
South Lakes,
Yep.
surprise. So it looks like that conference, Fairfax is always strong, lost to Oakton, which was a surprise because Oakton had lost to Langley. So it looks like that conference on paper is a scramble at this point.
I would agree with you. I think, Lake Braddock sticks out to me a little bit.
Like,
They've had some really good teams. Very offensive minded coach. at Lake Braddock and Mike Dockery. He's got some talented wideouts, maybe some of the best pair of wideouts that you might see outside of Hayfield in Northern Virginia in Class 6. Kai Austin and Xavier Maine, who I think Xavier Maine's going to play. He's going to William and Mary. I think he's maybe lined up to play linebacker at William and Mary, but some really good offensive talent at Lake Braddock. Obviously, West Springfield, you mentioned earlier, they are a really good team. And Fairfax historically has been, the last 4 or 5 years has really come on as a powerhouse. A couple of years ago, they had Tony Rojas, who's now moved on and is really making a lot of headway at Penn State. He was all over the field in the game I saw on Saturday. And of course, South County, you mentioned with Jerry Pannoni. Now, losing to Quince Orchard big is not an embarrassment. Quince Orchard is one of the perennial powerhouses in public schools in Maryland. And they've got another dynamic year. We're going to see them in a couple of weeks against Stonebridge. So we'll get to see them play another Northern Virginia team. But I honestly like Lake Braddock coming out of that Patriot district. I think on paper, they're the best team to come out of there. And I could see them with the best record heading into the playoffs out of the Patriot district.
Now, Jason, what did you make of Lake Braddock's win over Colgan? Now, I'm on Alex Koo and Jason Golson's Prince William board, so I do follow Prince William football, whether I want to or not. And so Colgan had a little hype coming into the season. So when the game was close at halftime, Lake Braddock drilled him in the second half. What did you make of that? What did you make of that game?
That was the week 1 game, right? They
Yes.
played in week 1, I think.
Yeah, week 1 game.
I'm not too surprised. Actually, I really like Lake Braddock. Now the second week of the season, we'll get into that in a second. Last week they played Madison, and Madison beat them. I think it was 31-15 or something like that. But Madison's on a different level. I think they're up there as a state title contender in my eyes, and we can talk about them in a second. I'm not too surprised though. I really like what Lake Braddock does. I like what Coach Daugherty has done the last few years. I was also pretty high on Colgan as well, Julian, coming into this season. I think they had a lot of returning players. I did think that game would be fairly competitive, but I'm not surprised that Lake Braddock won it, frankly. I think, again, I like Daugherty. He's a great in-game adjustment coach is what I've noticed about some of his games. When they are something that's not working well for them, he will quickly pivot to something else and find plays that will work, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe a team's moving the ball, and then all of a sudden it sort of stops. And that's not necessarily the offensive team breaking down. That's more his ability to adjust defensively as to what he's seeing on the field. So,
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. When I did watch the Madison game online, the Madison Lake Braddock game online, I was at the game last year. I felt they played them better last year than they did this year. I thought Lake Braddock, it wasn't like they were dominated on the line of scrimmage or anything like that. I just felt like Madison was executing in midseason form. And I just felt you didn't get that feeling with Lake Braddock. So maybe it's just an early season loss. And it's not that meaningful. Well, let's go to 6D and go up to county. And you mentioned Madison, so let's start with the Concord. Last year that was a fascinating conference.
Mhm.
South Lakes actually nipped it, but they lost some kind of tiebreaker for the state playoffs. Don't ask. I know you understand it better than me, but let's don't get too far in the weeds on that. But South Lakes came out the season with 2 huge losses. They lost.
Yeah.
They lost Brian Kennedy. They lost James Shunke. I guess they probably had some graduation loss last year, and they didn't even have a deep roster last year. But anyway, Madison with Cale Yates and Dominic Nicely. Yates is the quarterback, scrappy quarterback, does a great job, kind of like the Tristan Evans type of quarterback. And then Dominic Nicely, who's committed somewhere, running back, awesome, explosive running back, also an amazing kickoff returner. They look to be in postseason form already.
Yeah, they do. Justin Counts, their head coach, Julian. I can't sing his praises enough. If you look at where the consistency of James Madison over the last few years, it's as good as anybody in the state. Now, I know they haven't crossed that hurdle and pulled in a title, and that will be the thing that they've got the target on their back for. But just year over year, play after play, even if they get down or they start the season soft, they're going to be right there fighting you at the very end. And that's, to me, that's, and I wrote some of these numbers down. Let me read you this real quick on Madison.
Sure.
In 2021, they had 29 seniors on their team. In 2022, they had 33 seniors on their team.
Hmm.
And last year, they had 28 seniors on their team. He is getting all the athletes that and recruiting them to play football from the hallways of that school. You don't see numbers like that. I know it's a Class 6 school, and they are a large school and they have numbers, but you still got to convince kids to come out for football. Those numbers are dwindling across the state. We've talked about this before, and not as many boys are going out to play football. They're looking at other sports, other opportunities, and things like that. Counts does a really good job of making sure that kids come out. And I think that depth that you have when kids get hurt, somebody else is able to come in, they buy into that, and they're very consistent with what they do. They shut out Stonebridge in week 1. Now, Stonebridge is sort of rebuilding here with the new coach, as you're aware of, but that was only the second shutout in the history of Stonebridge football, and Madison can claim that. So they're really good. Counts is great. Nicely's a phenomenal back, and defensively, they get at it, man. They absolutely get at it. They jam the line. They force you to do things that you're not comfortable with, and they will smack you in the mouth a little bit. So
yeah, they have a supreme a bunch of assistant coaches too. I know their offense coordinator was a major prospect quarterback himself down south. I forgot the guy's name. Does it ring a bell?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
no.
Yeah. I can't think of it. It'll come to me. And then I just think Madison, the baseball program, Coach Counts is a third base coach, assistant coach for them. Coach Counts played baseball for UVA, but they just have a bunch of guys who are invested in Madison sports, and they support those programs, and they do a phenomenal job. Well, let's move on to Westfield. Now, Westfield had a great running game last year. The game that I saw, they couldn't pass the ball at all, even though I understand they had some highly rated receivers last year. I saw them against South Lakes, and I know they have a new coach this year. Their legendary coach retired. Opened up the game with a huge loss to Patriot, which I know shocked everybody because that was those schools aren't far apart. They're probably only 15 miles apart. We would think that would be a tough game, and it would kind of give us an idea where those teams stood. Patriot put a 49-6 loss, hung a 49-6 loss on them, but then they bounced back with a big win over Mount Vernon, which Mount Vernon was supposed to be a team that could challenge for second in that in the national. But anyway, what do you make early days of Westfield?
Yeah, the last couple of years, we built this expectation for Westfield when they won, was it 3 consecutive state titles or 3 out of 4 years, as just, a sort of a dominant team, and they were going to be that way forever. I think, the last few years, they probably, by their own standards, they've probably been down a little bit. I think they will ultimately rebound. There's a lot of talent on their team. Obviously with a new coach, new systems, new formats, new schemes, new routines, you name it. That takes time. That takes time. And I think, with only a 10-game regular season, people like you and I, if we're rooting for somebody, we probably don't have the patience to wait to game 8 to try and figure this out. We're sort of chomping at the bit on game 1, 2, or 3 here. I think Westfield will ultimately figure it out. I do think there'll be another playoff team. I just think the problem for right now facing them in the Concord district is Madison. And you look at teams like Westfield or even a Centerville over the last couple, they've been really good for a number of years, and they sort of fell off last year as well. So I think it opened the door for a team like Madison just to be really good. But some of that also was probably the struggles of a team like a Westfield or a Centerville. And last year, South Lakes obviously, was really good and eked out or was just beating out on that number, the playoff point number. But they had a really good team, and they might be off a little bit this year. So, but I look, Madison or Westfield rather they've got a really good running game. I think they've got to work on the passing game a little bit. Historically, they've always played really good defense, so I suspect that to continue. And then they'll rebound here, Julian. I'm not that Patriot loss. Patriot's a pretty good team. So, Patriot, they've challenged Battlefield before for, coming out of the Cedar Run district and haven't been able to quite get over that hurdle. But Patriot's not a slouch. So, now the score surprised me a little bit in that game. But I think Westfield will rebound here and have a really good season.
Yeah, I agree. And we look at the rest of that conference. You mentioned Centerville. I think they had a loss this weekend. South Lakes looks to be clearly rebuilding this year with a big loss to Osborne and then a loss to Robinson. I think Robinson only won a game or 2 last year. Oakton Oakton beat, Oakton had a win over, was it Fairfax? Oakton beat,
Was it fair? I think it might have been Fairfax.
I
I'd have
think,
to
yeah,
check that one.
Oakton come out with a win over Fairfax. They lost to Langley in the opening game, a Langley team with a brand new
Yeah.
coach, unfortunately. So it looks like maybe Oakton maybe a contender in that district for at least second or third.
Yeah, possibly. Chantilly's the other team we haven't talked about,
Yeah.
in that district. And, they've had some pretty good teams in the past. Haven't been able to catch either one of their games this year. So don't know where they're really going to stack up. I think, and Oakton's had some down seasons. I mean, look, they've, for them to string, 5, 6, 7 wins out of this season, I think would be a great building block for that program to come out of the sort of the bad spot they were in for a few years. So it'd be great to see Oakton do well. And there's a lot of great athletes that come out of that Oakton area. And I think one thing you're seeing, Julian, in particularly these Fairfax County schools, there's a lot of good teams and only just maybe one or two great teams, that you can sort of put there on that pedestal and say, yeah, they're they can fight their way all the way to December. But I think you've got a lot of parity within the balance of the teams, sort of 2 or 3 through 12, that type of thing, where, on any given Friday night, the old saying, you can line up and you can win a game. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think we'll continue to see some results that maybe you and I might go in thinking, okay, I think Oakland's going to beat this team, and you might see a flipped result on it. So.
No, exactly. That makes it fun. Well, speaking of parity, let's move to the Liberty. Last year, Liberty was very tight between Herndon, Washington Liberty, Yorktown. McLean got off to a great start. Yorktown ended up coming out of that district and beating undefeated South Lakes team on the last play of the game. I know they got a running back, Kobe Kostelenko. I had to give him a shout out. I'm friends with his father. And Yorktown's come out, I believe they're 2-0. But my guess is Liberty is another one of those conferences that can go in any of numerous directions this year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you. I think Yorktown, Washington Liberty, Langley, maybe McLean this year. I'm not sure. It could go anyway. I don't know too much about Marshall this year. They've been off a little bit the last couple of years. Wakefield, the same. But again, I think you've got some pretty good teams in there. Again, I wouldn't say teams that necessarily will contend for a state title. I'm sure they're hoping they will, and you never know. But I think you've got a lot of teams that, again, you put them on paper, and then, if you were doing high school point spreads, you're probably looking at no more than 3 or 4 points difference in a point spread on any given Friday night, which tells me either team could win. And as you know, look, a lot of these times in high school football, these things are, unfortunately, it's around, who didn't get hurt. Did your star player not get hurt? Is he playing? Do you have a full contingent of folks? What was the weather like? I mean, things turn in high school football on very nuanced things. A single player, 2 players, coaching decision, a bad snap, things like that. So that all things like that oftentimes can flip the outcome of a game on a Friday night, particularly when you have that type of parity.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, let's go to Prince William County in Class 6. I believe there's two conferences. There's the Cardinal, and then there's the Cedar Run. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's 3. There's actually the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth District has some teams in Region 6B as well. So
okay, I got you. Okay,
that's your Brook Point, your Colonial Forges, those teams.
Okay, got it. That's right. Okay, so let's start with I believe the Cedar Run, which is the western part of the county, which is clearly the strength of the county. And even in basketball, it's is on equal footing as the eastern part of Prince William, which is one of the best basketball areas in the country historically. But in the Cedar Run, we have Patriot, we have Gainesville, we have Westfield. Patriot, Gainesville, and Battlefield. Those are 3 teams, newish schools, lots of great athletes, great coaching. Are those the 3 schools once again are going to be fighting it out?
Yeah, totally agree with you. I think those are the 3 headliners. You've also got Freedom out of Loudoun County, Osborne Park, and Unity Reed. But I agree with you. I think Battlefield, Gainesville, and Patriot are the 3 headliners that would come out of there. And they're all really good. I absolutely tip the scale though to Battlefield. I think they are really, really good. They've been great for years. I mean, here's a statistic for you. Their head coach, who came over from Eastern View 3 years ago, Greg Hatfield, he's not lost a regular season game.
Hmm.
They're 30-0 in the regular season, Julian.
Wow.
Now they haven't executed like they wanted in the playoffs, and they've run up against a very good Freedom Woodbridge team last year, particularly, who sort of took them to the woodshed. But you don't. I don't care what your schedule looks like. You don't go 30-0 in the regular season without having a lot of talent and a lot of good coaching. And Battlefield has proven that.
Is Mark Cox the coach that won the state championship, at least one state championship at
Yeah.
Hatfield? Is he still assisting Hatfield? Because I know he assisted
I
him.
believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I'd have to check on that though.
Yeah. Now, Patriots coached by Coach Finnerty, I
Finnerty, yep.
believe. Great
Yep.
character. The Patriots got some athletes out there. That win against Westfield definitely raised eyebrows. So it looks like to me they're off to a great start.
The Patriot, look, they've got one of the best running backs in the state, and that's to say something, because the running backs that are the senior class running backs that are in the state of Virginia this year, and maybe we'll get to that in a second. I think it's one of the best senior classes the state of Virginia has ever seen. And this kid, Jackson McCarter, out of Patriot, who I believe is going to Villanova to play his football, he may not crack the top 5, and any other year he'd be possibly the best running back in the state. That's how good this senior class is with some of these backs that are dotted throughout the state. So he's dynamic. He's had multiple 200-yard games in his career. And offensively, I think Patriot can sort of give you the firepower that any team can. My question with Patriot, can they hold up defensively against a team like Battlefield? And I think that's what we're going to have to look out as those teams will battle, I think, again, late in the regular season here. So
yeah. Well, Gainesville is the newer of those 3 schools. And I think last year people were unclear whether they finally had arrived and was a contender for the crown. Right. And I think he took a pretty convincing loss late in the season. Do you think this is the year they'll be able to contend for the title?
You would hope so. It does take newer teams like Gainesville some time to get going. And again, I think that, they had a great start to last year. They did fizzle out a little bit and took a tough loss there down the stretch. Their strength is their offensive line. They returned, I think, 3 starters, if I'm not mistaken, on the offensive line. So, as long as they continue to run the ball well, protect the quarterback, I think Gainesville will absolutely be in the conversation. And I'll go back to my statement here from about 5 minutes ago. Look, on a Friday night, anything can happen, Julian. These are high school. We're dealing with 15 to 18-year-old kids here. So, the consistency may not be what we all want as fans. So I do like Gainesville. I think, again, the question is going to be, an entire team package. Can they put it together to hang with someone like a Battlefield, who I think's probably got a little more experience and maybe a few more playmakers in some of the skill positions that you'd want to see for a team to move on and make a deep playoff run. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned earlier Osborne had a big win over South Lakes. It's hard to put that win in perspective now, but it was still nice to see. I know Osborne has not necessarily set the world on fire of late, and I know Freedom has a new coach. Freedom South Riding has a new coach, Teddy. I can't think of Teddy's last name, but he coached at Robinson for a long time, and so Freedom does get some athletes as well. So I know they're the kind of teams that they look to make a move as well. Let's go to the eastern part of Prince William County. We wouldn't have to talk much about the eastern part of the county last year because it was all about Freedom Woodbridge. But this year, there's a huge void that's been created. Some of the kids at Freedom Woodbridge have transferred locally to those schools, and I don't think we probably know exactly where we are yet. But when you think of those schools, there's Potomac, there's home of the great Jay Golson. There's Forest Park, there's Woodbridge, there's Colgan. I know there's a few more I'm going to forget. What are you looking at in the eastern part of the county in the Cardinal?
Yeah, so Hilton, Garfield, I think maybe the other couple teams that are in that. It is a big shift from where it was the last few years. Obviously, Freedom out of Woodbridge was the dominant team. They're only playing an abbreviated schedule this year, as some of your viewers may not be aware of. I think it's a wide open district. Honestly, I think I don't know who the favorite is. If you asked me to put money on it, I'd probably say maybe Woodbridge or Garfield, but I'm not really sure, honestly. Potomac possibly. Golson's old school, but I think with the dominance of Freedom, Woodbridge being out of there, you've got 6 teams. And, right now, honestly, I think heading into week 3, it's probably a coin flip, Jay, to see who could come out of there with the best record. I think the problem for any team that's coming out of that district, the Cardinal district, is going to be taking on the winner of the Cedar Run district. At some point they're going to have to come up against a Patriot or a Battlefield or maybe a Gainesville in that, that's going to be a challenge. I think the Cedar Run on paper is definitely the stronger of the 2 districts at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk about quickly the other district in 6B. Most of those teams are, I think, Stafford County or
Yep.
South. But I think you mentioned Mountain View. There's Massaponax, I believe. Any notable teams to talk about out of that district?
So this is a district. I think Massaponax is actually down in Class 5. This Colonial Forge is a very, very interesting team for me coming out of there. And I think historically they've been one of the best teams coming out of the Commonwealth. I like what they've got this year. Now, do they have enough again to win a region? This region has, I think it's 18 teams, Julian. It is one of the largest regions of any class, number of schools in the state. So this is one of the few regions where more teams miss the playoffs than make the playoffs based on the way this set up. Only 8 teams per region make the playoffs, and some are less if you have a bye with some of the real smaller numbered regions. But this is one where you're going to have a number of pretty good teams potentially miss the playoffs in this region. So this is one you got to find your way to sort of 6 or 7 wins and hope that the PowerPoints sort of work out in your favor, or you may be on the outside looking in. I'll tell you two teams here that could make some noise that maybe folks aren't really thinking of because they've had some down years would be Brook Point and North Stafford. North Stafford had some good years in the from that like 2015 to 2019 timeframe. They've fallen off a little bit. They actually played, I think it was last week, they might have played Dinwiddie in a very competitive game. Dinwiddie's one of the favorites to come out of Class 4, probably potentially even get to a title game. A lot of people are thinking against the likes of Phoebus, or actually semifinal, I think, against Phoebus. The North Stafford played them very well, Julian. So that was a little surprising. And I think Brook Point could surprise some people this year. So they've got some, again, I think another district, Commonwealth district, where you've got some good teams, probably no team that you would sort of earmark as great. The question is going to be, can any of those teams rise up and take on the likes of a Battlefield when he gets deep into the postseason to win a regional title? Big region, 18 teams, I think, 18 or 19, I can't remember. That's a lot of teams to sort of have to plow your way through.
It's a big region, but also it's also some of the great athletes in that area as well. So not only do you have a big region as in size of number of teams, also lots of great athletic programs. So in a way, I think I feel it's unfair that district. You mentioned quickly.
I do too. I think it's one of the hardest regions to come out of, just because of the way the athletes are spread out. Each team has a couple, and that makes it really hard. Particularly now, and again this year, I think it's sort of, maybe it's going to be anybody's game to some degree, maybe minus Battlefield because of the Freedom Woodbridge, obviously, not having a full schedule. So
exactly. Hey, real quickly, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this. You did mention PowerPoints. I understand the PowerPoint system may have been changed this year, and that the regions can choose to ignore the PowerPoints and have their own system or something like that.
They can. So the VHSL has said the PowerPoint system is what we go by. However, the regions can select their own method of doing it. Now, that sounds very nebulous to you and I. I don't know what that really means. I'm sure the coaches would just have to get together. Maybe they have to decide before the season starts. I'm not really sure. I have heard, and I'd have to verify this. So, don't quote me on this. And maybe want to get someone like Hatfield or somebody to verify. But I believe next year it's going to be completely overhauled, the PowerPoint. So, you and I have talked about it. I think we talked about it on your show at length. What happened last year to South Lake. So it's one of those things. I think, it's probably time to take a holistic look at it. And obviously with the goal of making sure we put the best teams into the playoffs. Right.
Well, Jason, let's come home and talk about Loudoun County.
Yep.
Loudoun County, I think, and we'll just do Class 5 and Class 4 because the divisions are really small. They had big offseason news as well, but it was dwarfed by the news at Hayfield. And that news was Mickey Thompson was stepping down. He actually stepped down in the spring, and he was replaced by Kedrick Golston. I believe played for the Redskins at some point, and his son is a major prospect. That was huge news. How impactful is that news? Stonebridge is one of the biggest power in high school football in Virginia, definitely in Northern Virginia. How big was that news, and how are things going thus far for Stonebridge?
It's huge news. And as a kids that went through the system, certainly a fan, whenever you lose someone of the caliber of Mickey Thompson, who absolutely earned the right to retire. I saw him the other night. He looked great. I think he's got a huge smile on his face. Gets to spend a lot of time with his grandkids now. You're talking about a guy who won 16 regional titles in his time there and played on the final Saturday in high school football 12 times.
Wow.
Just at Stonebridge. That is almost impossible to replace. I don't know Kedrick Golston. By all accounts, he's a wonderful, wonderful person and going to be a really, really good coach. He came from Gonzaga. Both of his kids are with him. He's got a freshman on the team who's seen some action. He's returned some punts. His son looks like a phenomenal athlete. His frame is college ready right now. He's only a junior, and he's got an offer sheet that is longer than my arm. So he will be really good. But it is big news. And anytime you change, the single wing, which was a staple of what Coach Thompson ran, he put a lot of twist on it and created his own variations of that to a much more traditional offense. There's going to be growing pains. And I think, the biggest question for Stonebridge right now, we've seen it in the first two games as they've started 0-2, trying to find an offensive identity. And I think it will take some time. I hope everybody's patient with Coach Golston on this. And give him the time that he deserves to be able to try and build this back up. Stonebridge is very used to winning, and I worry a little bit that the patience may wear thin from some of the fans. I've got to continue to make sure I control myself, but I think they will. I think they will right the ship. They started tough last year. I think they started 0-5 last year, lost a lot of. And their opening part of their schedule is brutal. They just lost to a team, Dunbar out of Baltimore, who had not lost a football game since 2019 this past Friday. Madison, we talked about, they shut them out. Madison obviously is a state title contender, and they've got a couple more tough games with some Maryland schools here. They will be fine. They've got some injuries they're going through right now. They're one of their top defensive ends who's going to defensive lineman who's going to Virginia Tech. Christian Evans has been hobbled. He got hurt in the Madison game pretty early. Didn't dress last week, and a few other things that they've got to work through. And I think for the key for them defensively, they'll be fine. It's finding an offensive identity. They've pretty much replaced every skilled player from an offense. They had a couple transfers that went out to John Champ. Particularly the scheduled starting quarterback. So they're, brand new quarterback or quarterbacks that are going to be in the system. It's going to take some time, but it is big news. And I do think Coach Golston, he brought in a couple of former teammates as well. So he's got Rock Cartwright. You may remember that name from the old Redskins, and Kari Campbell. If for some of those go deep into the Redskin lore, some of those players, and he did retain some coaches from Mickey's staff as well, which is good to see. So I think he was able to sort of put a mix in there. And again, I haven't had a personal chance to spend any time with him, Julian, but everyone I talked to that has gotten to know him, he's really good. He's just as good of a person, though. And I think in today's world, when you guide young men with a good person influence them, that's a huge, huge asset to any school.
Yeah, I think replacing a legend with a Redskin was a great idea because he's going to have the respect and the admiration of the kids. They had a really good JV team last year. The reason why I know that is because my daughter was a JV cheerleader for Riverside. So I got to see them play. They were amazing. And I know you mentioned they lost their quarterback to Champ. Generally, did they keep most, and I know they got some transfers in, coaches' sons, and I think a couple more. Generally, did they keep those great athletes or those great football players in the program, the JV players? Did most of the kids come back, even though Thompson retired?
Yeah, most of them did. There are a few that decided not to come back and maybe they're just playing other sports, focus on basketball or lacrosse or baseball or what have you, which is fair. I never never begrudge a kid for, trying to choose their best path that they feel is right for them. But most of them did come back. They've got two young junior cornerbacks, Xavier Wimbush and Chase Skeeter. So they're back into their defense. Will be there next year for them. Their strength is really their defensive line, frankly, and their linebacker core with Golston, Jonathan Newton, who's a tackling machine, and Christian Evans, who I mentioned earlier, and just some other returning players there. So that's going to have to carry them. But to answer your question, yeah, most of the kids stayed in the program. This was always a small numbered senior class for them compared to some of their senior classes in the past. So again, I think, what Coach Golson is going to have to do to, sort of following the footsteps of Coach Thompson is to make sure, he gets out to the youth games and he really looks at what's happening in the Ashburn Youth Football League to make his presence felt on those Saturday mornings that, hey, keep your kids going, and, they can be a part of something special over the next few years to make sure that the freshman team, the JV teams, and then even the teams below that in the youth leagues are see his presence and can feel that out there, something they want to be a part of for the next 4 to 6 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure by the end of the season, once they get into their comfortable district play, I think once again, they'll probably have a bye in the postseason and they'll be 1 or 2 games away from returning to the state championship. That's for as quality a program it is. They don't have the overly difficult road in the postseason, unlike the Prince William teams that you were just talking about in the 6B conference. So when you look beyond Stonebridge in Class 5, I know Independence had a nice win over Tuskegee, who a Class 4 team that had gone far last year, and they overturned a 42-13 loss from the year before and beat them last year. I have some friends, Matt Curran and Patrick Beggs, with kids on the team, so I hear all about Independence football. Maybe this is the year Independence football will make a move.
Hey, maybe it is. They RJ Windows, their coach. He's he studied under Mickey Thompson, so he knows how to coach football. And if you haven't seen Indy play, Julian, you have, I think, but any of your viewers, they've got a linebacker, a kid by the name of Jackson Thorne. He led the state last year in tackles. I think 100. Don't quote me on the number. 170-ish tackles last year.
Wow.
Which you can do the math on a season of 11 or 12 games. That's a lot. That's 13, 14 tackles a game. If you can get a chance to get out and watch him play, he is a dynamite sideline to sideline player. They've got some really good athletes. I too was surprised at the Tuskegee loss to Indy. Tuskegee's a really good team in Class 4. I actually had them earmarked for a state semifinal in my predictions. And to see Indy pull that game out 21-20 last week was a little surprising. So it tells me, maybe Tuskegee had some injuries. I didn't see the game, but it tells me that Indy has an opportunity here to potentially come out of this region. I would say along with Briar Woods. I think they're the other team. If you were going to ask me about who could potentially come out and challenge Stonebridge, sort of dominated this region for years and years, as we've talked about, it would be Briar Woods. They are a senior-laden team. Coach Burnett has just offensive studs up and down his lineup, starting with their quarterback, Brady Carmichael, Trey Dudley, the running back, is going off to JMU in the fall, Colin Capistrand, Tyler Yoder at receiver. They've got weapons to be able to challenge a team like Stonebridge late in the season or into the playoffs. They did lose a game to John Champ at the beginning of the year. Now, Champ's a good football team. Coming out of Class 4, so we can talk about them in a little bit. I was a little surprised by that result. I think it was a 7-6 game, but I look for Briar Woods to be right there at the end, possibly along with Independence, and of course, I think Stonebridge will get it turned around. Yeah,
I think John Champ is a perennial, a solid team. They dropped down from 6 to 4, so the fact that you lose to a John Champ is. I'm sure is no shame. Of course, I got to shout out my man Ernie Porter at Riverside, right down the street.
Yes.
They had a nice overtime win over. Oh no, they had a nice win over Heritage, a rival team, which is the next district over. Glad to see Riverside on the board. I know Potomac Falls lost the quarterback Johnny Apiola, so that don't know how they'll be this year. Last year they're probably around 500. But I think we probably covered most of the Class 5 in the area, haven't we, Jason?
Yeah, there's two Fairfax teams that are in that region. Massaponax and Riverbend.
Yeah.
And they've historically been playoff teams. So, I would think, those teams could probably make a little bit of noise too. I don't think, again, 5D is not the hardest region to come out of, to be honest with you. And I think Stonebridge has benefited from that over the years. It's not only 9 teams in there, and they've selected since the 8 teams typically make the playoffs, they've done a bye for the top teams there, just because they just didn't, it would be 8 out of 9 teams historically making the playoffs. And they've also got Harrisonburg, who's in that region from the Valley District. So, it's relatively, I wouldn't say easy, but the numbers line up in your favor to make the playoffs if you're in that region.
Yeah, as we were saying earlier, I think once Stonebridge gets in the comfortable confines of district play, I think they're going to be fine. And it's up, maybe Briarwoods or some of the others that you mentioned. So let's go to class 4 in Loudoun County. Obviously, Tuscarora, they're great. They seem like they're great in everything. Definitely good in basketball, girls and boys. I think they went to the state in both last year. And I believe their football team went deep into the postseason as well. I guess it maybe lost to Salem or something like that.
That's correct. That's correct. And a pretty close game. Salem was outstanding last year. Their star running back, Peyton Lewis, who I believe went to Tennessee to play his college football, just ended up being the difference in that game. He was very difficult to bring down. If you ask any of the teams that had Salem on the schedule. But yeah, Tuscarora is a really good team. They return a lot of players. And I still think they're likely the top team to come out of Region 4C, in my opinion, despite the loss to Indy this past Friday.
Yeah. And Indy is class 5. And so, not that there's a huge difference in the school sizes, but it's something to think about. How about, we talked about Champ in class 4, obviously a contender down in Aldi. Yep. I think Loudoun County has been generally solid. Woodgrove, I think Woodgrove is down last year. I'm not sure about this year. Who else I don't know about Loudoun Valley, but who else in class 4 should we be talking about?
Yeah, those are the ones. I'd say, outside of Tusky, I would probably turn my attention to John Champ shortly thereafter. They've always had, and they've picked up a couple players that came in from Stonebridge, who I think will help make a difference, including their starting quarterback and Brandon Pena. County and Valley have put some good teams into the playoffs in the years past. I could see both of those teams doing okay. And I'll get a good look at Woodbridge this coming weekend. Woodgrove this coming weekend. They play Stonebridge, so we'll sort of, maybe get to see, where Stonebridge is at, but also importantly where Woodgrove's at coming out of class 4 to see if they, they potentially can make some noise in the playoffs. I think the other teams, Broad Run is still in a bit of a rebuilding mode. I think Parkview may continue to struggle a little bit. Just their numbers have been down, maybe demographic related over the past few years. Dominion, Heritage, Rockridge, probably would be on the outside looking in, to make a deep playoff run. So I would say, look, out of all the other teams, Champ, Valley, and Woodgrove and County would be the 4 that could potentially rise up and challenge Tusky.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Jason. Well, look, let's end by talking just real briefly, 30,000 feet view on the rest of the state. Obviously, the biggest result we've had this far is Phoebus just absolutely just dominating this class 6 champion, class 6 runner-up, Highland Springs and Perennial Power. They won class 5 at least several times recently. That had to be a little bit of a surprise, but they keep having these surprises every year. Phoebus will play these teams and they're supposed to, be close games or lose to them. It seems like they win every single time.
Phoebus is one of the most dominant programs, regardless of classification, that we have in the state of Virginia. And I think you can argue that they are probably the most dominant defensive team that the state has ever produced over a period of time. They keep rebuilding that defense. They'll lose guys to major college programs, and it seems like they almost get better every year for defensively. It's unbelievable. And to go into Highland Springs, and I don't care if you think Highland Springs might be having a slightly off year. That is a difficult environment. That's a difficult team, well-coached team by Lauren Johnson every year. And to be able to go in and dominate, the score wasn't reflective of how dominant that game was. I think Highland Springs at one point going into the fourth quarter, only had one first down in that game. That is atypical of Highland Springs.
And they have two Division I prospects at running back, Highland Springs.
Two Division I, Eric, yeah, and they just shut him down. I think they were getting a half yard to carry. What Jeremy Blount does at Phoebus, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Now, you can argue that offensively, they could probably do some things differently, maybe, or if they had a better offensive team, they would be easily the most dominant team in the state. But defensively, in my opinion, there's no question about what you see there. What Freedom Woodbridge was to offense a couple of years ago, Freedom has been to defense, and I would compare those two at those types of levels. So they are arguably the best team in the state right now, probably along with Maury in Class 5, but they are arguably the best, and Hayfield potentially now. They're arguably the best team in the state. And I could probably sit here and argue for quite a while of why I think they might be. So,
yeah. So, and I know Maury, I believe, had a comeback win over Maryland Power Wise. So Maury, it looks like a very strong favorite in Class 5. I can't even think of a team that we would even mention in the conversation. I don't think. But 6.
Yeah, I agree with you. Kings Fork is a pretty good team down from the 757 area code. They could potentially give Maury's got a tough game this week against Highland Springs, actually. So I think we'll get a little bit of both. We'll get to see, this Highland Springs rebound potentially in our, can they stay with the likes of a Maury, and how good is Maury really? On paper, Maury's about as good as anybody. They've got athletes up and down the field coming off another state title, and they've had several in the past few years. Coach McCain, always puts a phenomenal team on the field. I think what you're going to see this weekend against Highland Springs will tell us a lot about Maury's, dominance in Class 5. The only other team I could think of potentially, they tend to be more of a good regular season team. They haven't quite done it in the playoffs. Has been Green Run out of Region 5A. They've had some really, really good teams, some great athletes, really good coaching. I'm keeping an eye on them to see if they can make a run at Maury here. In my opinion, though, it's Maury's state title to lose.
You did mention Matoka and me Matoka to me in a message you sent me. I believe they're Class 5. Are they a contender to do anything? Yeah,
they are. They're in 5C, and 5C, top to bottom, may be the best, one of the best regions. Matoka, I think, actually, and I saw them last year. They ended up losing to Stonebridge in a game, but they actually were very competitive in that game, and they are another senior late team. I always look for teams that have a lot of seniors returning, good key positions, offensive skill positions, because I think that means a lot. You can rotate, a receiver to quarterback, and Matoka's a team that's done that this year. One of their top receivers is now playing quarterback, and their other receiver that they've got and they're all Power 4 guys that are coming out of Matoka. Keep your eye on them. But that region with Matoka, there's some other really good teams. William Fleming out of Roanoke is a very, very solid team. Also got a large returning cast this year. I look at a team like Bird, LC Bird out of Richmond, who could potentially make some noise. And then I'm going to give you a surprise team here because they've got a couple players that have retransferred back in, and that's Louisa. Louisa has two of the top players in the entire state of Virginia that had transferred to Woodbury Forest early on in their careers and have now moved back into the Louisa zone and will be playing for Louisa this year. Running back and another wide receiver. And the running back actually is I believe, Savian Hyder. He may be the top-rated running back in the state right now. And I mentioned earlier, the running backs in the state are ridiculous. He's right up there with them. So Louisa's another team to keep your eye on. I think Region 5C this year could be the sleeper region to potentially have one of those players come out of there or one of those teams come out of there and put a challenge up to Maury for a state title.
I still don't know if they'll be able to stay within 4 touchdowns of Maury.
I know, Julian. I always think about this. All right, who can challenge Maury? And I start listing these teams. And then when I see Maury, I'm like, yeah, it's not happening.
Yeah, I saw the Stonebridge game. They're downright scary. The speed and the size and just the tenacity. Those are some mean guys. They don't play. Maury does not play. They don't play.
They've got what we call dudes, man. They come at it from all positions. Their quarterback, I mean, he was young last year, and he was phenomenal.
They had two
Arturi,
quarterbacks last year, right? They didn't have a guy.
yeah, Arturi Newkirk. Keep an eye on that name. I think we'll be seeing him somewhere big college football on the East Coast. In a couple of years, starting for a team that maybe one of us follow. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, it looks like Class 6 may actually be down this year in relation to 5 and 4. Do you think Highland Springs will be in the state championship game this year, or do you think there are other teams that are gonna fight for those semifinal spots?
I think honestly, it's a toss up right now. Oscar Smith, in my opinion, has rebuilt a team. They were, another historically good program down in the Chesapeake area, Tidewater area. Was off a little bit the last couple of years. I think they've got a team that's to be reckoned with this year. So I could see someone like Oscar Smith coming out of that 6A region. Right now, to me, it's probably between Highland Springs, and I think we'll tell a lot from Highland Springs this game this week against Maury. But Highland Springs, Oscar Smith, maybe Thomas Dale. But right now, I'd almost lean towards, after that loss that Phoebus put on Highland Springs, I'd lean a little more toward Oscar Smith right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear the big names come back. I love the tradition. Well, now we're encroaching a little bit on the Matthew Hatfield territory, but do you have any insight into the 1 through 3? Just any big names? Like, I mean, usually you can throw names like Graham and Riverheads,
Yeah.
Liberty Christian private school out of Lynchburg. Hey, you have any names, players or teams to watch this year?
So when you talk about Class 3, you did the last one you just mentioned, Liberty Christian Academy out of Lynchburg. And when I talked about I've said this 3 times, the running backs that are in the state. To me, there's 3 guys that separate themselves from everyone else in the state. And that's Jeffrey Overton out of Hayfield. That's Harry Dalton out of Dinwiddie. And it's Gideon Davidson out of Liberty Christian. I haven't had a chance to see him play live. I have talked to people I have some friends in the Lynchburg area. They tell me I'm missing something by not seeing him. He's going to Clemson. He's been doing it for a long time there. And there are folks that will easily argue that he is the best running back in the state. I think those 3 individuals between Overton, Gideon Davidson, and Harry Dalton out of Class 4 Dinwiddie arguably make up, and again, I'd love to hear Hatfield's, vision of this, but make up the best running back senior class that the state has ever seen.
Wow.
Honestly, they are 3 of the most dynamic backs. And you have to go back a long way. You look at, I was looking at when Travion Henderson was at Hopewell, what was the rest of the class like around the area? You go back to the David Wilsons or the Joneses, Thomas and Julius Jones, who obviously, you would have earmarked, Julian. I believe those guys may have stood out a little more, but they didn't have a second and a third guy. It is impossible right now for me to tell you who the best running back in the state is. And you can make an argument for any of those 3. And there's the 4, 5s, and 6s are not too far behind them. It is a super, super, super deep conglomerate of running backs. So Liberty Christian would be a team I think is set up to go win another state title. And I think in Class 2 and Class 1, you sort of get the same folks, like a Graham and schools coming out of that. So.
Yeah. Well, look, Jason, this has been great. I'm excited for the season. I haven't seen a game live this year. I've been really busy. I'm looking forward to getting back out there and watching some of these games. I agree about the running backs. We didn't mention Highland Springs guys. Those guys were so good.
Eric Bird, I know. That's what I'm saying. You got Julian. There's if you just look at it on paper, there's 8 or 10 guys that you're like, man, that may be one of the best running backs I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
And it's so deep. It really is. And if, for any of you folks that listen to your show, if you haven't had a chance, you get a free Friday night, go find one of these schools that we've talked about. And it's very enjoyable, to bring back memories and you get a hot dog for $3 and go watch some pretty good football at times. So. Exactly.
Well, I was going to say also, Jeff Overton, and I haven't watched tons of high school basketball live over the years since I graduated high school football live, even though I watched tons of high school basketball. Jeff Overton is the best running back I have seen live in person since Chris Warren played, and I went to high school with Chris. Chris is a Hall of Fame nominee with the Seattle and Dallas. Jeff does things that are just unbelievable, but we have 2 or 3 others that we're talking about in in the same sentence. And that just goes to show you, as you're saying, the depth of the talent. And I also think this year is a year of defense. I think the scores have gotten kind of out of whack the last few years in football. I'm starting to see some dogfights, some 7-6s, some 6-0s. So it looks like the defense is returning as well. And maybe we're the day of the every game on the schedule being a 50-0 score, when we thought on like for example, the Patriot Westfield 49-6. That was happening a lot 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Coming into a game, it looked like a close game on paper. It's going to be a great game. And you go there, it's an absolute blowout. It was happening so much. It was really strange. And I felt like teams that were close on paper were being separated once the game started. And it's not very much fun to watch if you're a fan. So maybe the defenses are returning as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I love close football games because that's when you really zero in on the coaching and to see maybe who's thinking a little clearer from a coaching standpoint, making an in-game adjustments that we've talked about, things like that. So, when there's a close game, you sort of can see who rises to the top from a coaching standpoint. And that's always good. It's sort of easy to coach when it's a 56-0 ball on both sides. The losing coach and certainly the winning coach here. Running basic plays if you're the winning coach, and you're just trying to, make sure you don't get, kids hurt potentially if you're the losing coach. But, when you get a tight ball game, coaching does matter in many of these games. You take it today, it's just the kids it's a high school coach. Anybody can go do it. Some of these playbooks that you see and what these quarterbacks and offenses and even defensive, players have to learn, they're pretty complicated now. This isn't just the 6 or 7 plays that you and I might have been familiar with in high school that you had to go perfect. I mean, these get pretty deep with a lot of variations, a lot of twists. Quarterbacks, some quarterbacks calling their own plays at the high school level. That's, if you talk about preparing someone for the next level, that's where you'll see it. So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting. The other day, I was on some UVA groups, and UVA, we won a game where we got outgained by 100 yards, but we still had 470 yards of offense, whatever. I think Wake Forest had 560. So someone said, well, they dominated us or they outplayed us. I'm like, no, it's like tennis. I mean, when you score that many points, it comes down to who wins the big points. So
yep.
Yes, UVA got outgained, but we moved the ball when we needed to move the ball, and we moved the ball. We made the big plays. We had the big stops. We had the big first downs. We had the big touchdowns. So yes, that's when coaching and poise and execution, all the things that come in matter. It doesn't matter when you're outgained by 100 yards when you have that many yards on the. It matters who executes on the big plays, and UVA did that.
Right.
I like to end every podcast with a story about UVA. It makes everyone so much happier. So
it does,
yeah.
man. When you go out and beat Wake Forest by a point, I tell you, man, I'd be bragging about it too, Julian. I sure would.
Oh yeah, UVA fans are so beaten down. They're so negative, and for what this program has gone through the last 2 or 3 years,
oh gosh,
unspeakable tragedy. And kids transferring out, and now we're being outspit in the NIL realm. So it's not easy for programs that are in UVA's point, because we're competing against the big dogs, but we don't have the kind of big dogs purse strings. We don't have 5 players per position as Georgia or Alabama has. But we're trying to compete against those programs at times. So for us to get a big win like that, it's huge. And who knows? I'm going down to the Maryland game this week, with a chance to be 3-0 and to beat our nemesis. We're going to be on top of the world if we can beat Maryland. So
you will be. Maryland's offensively. Maryland's good. They've got one of their receivers, former Stonebridge guy that I follow pretty closely. I'm good friends with his father, Ty Felton. He's actually leading the nation in receiving yards right now.
Wow.
I believe he's tied for 4th in touchdowns. He's had a couple of great games out the box. So just keep an eye on him. If you want to drop any advices to the UVA coaches, it would be certainly shadow him with a second player. So
okay, we heard from Jason Sterling.
That's right. I'm telling you how to stop him.
Exactly. Last question, I promise. Does it seem like there's more upsets than normal in college football this season?
It does. It certainly does. And I think this is just the movement of players, through the transfer portal, NIL. I think also with the knowledge that I can get into the playoffs with a loss or maybe 2 this year, which wasn't there before. I think maybe it's changing some of the way coaches are coaching potentially. I still think you have the cream of the crop with Georgia and Ohio State, maybe throw Texas in there now. Oregon potentially, even though they've had a couple tough games. I think personally in college football, it's a lot deeper. I mean, even if you weren't starting, on your team and you maybe, you're a good player, you hit that transfer portal, you move in. So teams have sort of even themselves out. I was worried when the transfer portal first came to life that it's going to be so top heavy in college football. You're going to have 6 or 8 teams that's it. Nobody else can compete. I think it's sort of done the opposite. Maybe it's working in a way. I'm a classic guy, so I always like knowing, my team for 3 or 4 years before they turned over the roster. We just don't get that anymore, and that's fine. I've learned to accept it. To look for new players every year. But I do think it's it's certainly opened up for more teams to be competitive, and therefore I think you're going to potentially see more upsets as the season unfolds for sure.
That's a great point. Players are choosing to go somewhere and playing rather than being third or fourth on the depth chart, and it's easier to do that. And I guess I'd be remiss if we mentioned UVA, but just quickly, JMU, tough win this gritty win this week. I know that people are unhappy with the win, but I mean now all of a sudden James Madison, I guess the fans feel like they should win easy now that they had a couple good seasons in every sport. Also Tech had lots of news on their in the recruiting trail. What do you think about those teams for this year?
Yeah, look, I think for James Madison first, the expectations are really high now. Kurt Signetti, he's off to Indiana, took a lot of players with him. He built a program there that, people expect to win year in and year out and potentially even be a top 25 team. I think they will continue to challenge for potentially getting into that group of 5 playoff spot that's allocated out there now. I don't know if they're the best group of 5 team, but they've got a lot of talent. There's so many local kids, as you know, from all up and down the state now that will go to James Madison, and really, really, really good players. And I think that's exciting. So I think JMU will continue to do well. I like what they've built, a huge fan investment there. Just the alumni, the current student body, they've really bought into James Madison being a good football team. Maybe certainly not a dominant program yet. They've got to build that up and, maybe look for a larger conference one day out. But they're really good, and I think they'll be fine. Whether they can find their way into potentially a playoff spot, that's going to be tough. Getting in at number 12, but we'll see how they do. And Virginia Tech, I like what Brent Pry's done with that program. The cupboard was pretty bare when Fuente left, to be honest with you. And I think to be able to build that back up, what he's also done well, and you could look at the roster, it's clear as day. His recruiting in the state of Virginia has been phenomenal. He has gone out and reached out to local kids. When I think Fuente had an issue doing that, he was looking for his own guys throughout, and I think that's helped build that program back up. They took a tough loss in week 1, but Virginia Tech is on the rise here, and I think you'll see them get back to some level of prominence in the near future.
Yeah, as much as I hate to say it, I definitely think Tech is going to be back. I can't wait to see what Jeff Overton does there. I know. I think he's going to at least kick returns right away, make an impact, and maybe even in the backfield. I'm not sure exactly how successful freshman running backs are, but if there's one that can do it, my guess is Jeff Overton might be that.
It's Overton. I mean, Julian, you and I have seen him play live several times. The eyes don't deceive you. His athleticism. I've a couple of his plays I had never seen anybody ever do on a football field, ever. So
I have never seen a player being able to hurdle when they're getting ready to get tackled from the side or even behind in the legs. That's almost an easy tackle for a player that has the angle. He somehow takes that angle away by hurdling, and the legs are gone when the player makes the tackle. I've seen him do it 3 times live, and when you see it, I've never seen anyone do that before from behind.
It's unbelievable.
Angle. And
I got hurt just watching it.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I hurt myself just watching it.
Exactly. Yeah. So look, Jason, I know you got a busy day ahead of you. It took you longer than you promised me, but this has been great. Let's get together and chat later on in the season.
You got it, my friend. See you.
All right, Jason. Take care, buddy.